Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamsha. He Krishna Karuna Sindho Deenabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanusute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya eva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So today we were starting with chapter 9 of the Bhagavad Gita. This is halfway. Congratulations. Just little by little, we made it through halfway through the Gita so quickly. And we're on chapter 9 today. So very special chapter. This is directly in the middle of the Bhagavad Gita. And therefore, this chapter is known as the most confidential knowledge, chapter 9. So I'm sharing my slides here. Chapter 9 is entitled The Most Confidential Knowledge. So therefore, it's the most confidential knowledge. It's the most special one. But actually in chapter 10, Krishna then says that the knowledge that I'm telling you now is even more confidential. So it's very hard to decide what is the most confidential knowledge in the Bhagavad Gita. It all seems very confidential. But here Krishna particularly, mentions that this is very special. So at the end, I'll leave time for questions. I know a few of you have questions also on the previous chapter. You may have messaged me on WhatsApp. So it'll be a time to ask questions. Right now, we'll just get straight into this chapter. We'll dive deep into it. Very special chapter again. Actually, yes, I wanted to mention that this is, to my knowledge, the most quoted chapter of the Gita by Srila Prabhupada. So Srila Prabhupada quoted this chapter more than any other chapter. And there are so many verses in this chapter that Srila Prabhupada regularly quotes. It's amazing. And so in this today's discussion, we'll actually be going through many of the verses just because so many of them are so famous. So I'm actually starting with text 2 because it fits very well with the chapter title. Text 2 here. Rajavidya Rajaguhyam Pavitram Idamuttamam Pratyakshvavagamam Dharmyam Susukhum Kartumavyayam. So Krishna here says, he himself says this, he says, this knowledge is the king of education, the most secret of all secrets. It is the purest knowledge, and because it gives direct perception of the self by realization, it is the perfection of religion. It is everlasting and it is joyfully performed. So, Rajavidya, it is the king of education, Rajaguhyam. This is where the chapter title comes from. Rajaguhyam means the king of secrets. Srila Prabhupada translates this as the most secret of all secrets. So there's many secrets in this world, but this is the king of all secrets. Pavitram, it is pure. Idam uttamam, it is the highest, the best. Pratyaksha vagamam dharmyam, it gives you direct perception of dharma, of self-realization. It is the perfection of religion. Dharma, actually, pratyaksha vagamam dharmyam. So it gives you direct perception of the self, and it is the perfection of religion. It is avyayam, it is everlasting. And finally, susukhum kartumavyam, it is joyfully performed. So this verse actually has a very special part to this, that Krishna says that this knowledge is joyfully performed. Telling us that Krishna consciousness is a joyful process. This knowledge brings us joy, and he says, Susukum kartum, it is performedly done. This knowledge is an active knowledge. How can knowledge be performed? But this is what Krishna is telling us is vijnana, not jnana. It is active knowledge, it is realized knowledge. And that realized knowledge is joyfully executed. So a devotee of the Lord who's a pure devotee is actually always blissful. They're forever blissful because they are a pure devotee of the Lord. And so this is the the most important, most blissful knowledge, because by the pure devotee is always joyful, because pure devotional service, if we are actually on the platform of pure devotional service, then we will be joyful. So so according to Krishna's definition, pure devotional service is joyful. Therefore, if someone is not joyful, if they are unhappy in their Krishna consciousness, then it's a sign that it's not pure devotional service. Because if it's pure devotional service, we will be performing it joyfully. Because for the devotee, there's only pleasure, there's only happiness in this process. It is an ever blissful process, because there's nothing to be lament about. The devotee is not attached to the results. The devotee doesn't want anything from it. The devotee is transcendental to the modes. It's a very difficult position to come to, but the fact is that that difficult position is attained by the pure devotee of the Lord. So bhakti is not a non-joyful process. By very definition, if it is bhakti, it will bring happiness to the self. You'll find this very handy in maybe giving classes or preaching this principle, because people often ask, they say that, are you a devotee because of the happiness that you feel in Krishna consciousness? Why are you a devotee? And obviously we do it for the happiness also. It gives us happiness, therefore we are a devotee. But that happiness is a natural characteristic of pure devotional service. That happiness is not something that is separate. That is the very nature of devotional service. And so we don't do it for that reason, but it's the natural characteristic of devotional service. So here in the purport, Prabhupada explains, this is from text 1, the purport of text 1. He says, the very beginning of Bhagavad Gita, the first chapter, is more or less an introduction to the rest of the book. And the second and third chapters, the spiritual knowledge described, is called confidential. Topics discussed in the 7th and 8th chapters are specifically related to devotional service. And because they bring enlightenment in Krishna consciousness, they are called more confidential. But the matters which are described in the 9th chapter deal with unalloyed pure devotion. Therefore, this is called the most confidential. One who is situated in the most confidential knowledge of Krishna is naturally transcendental. He therefore has no material pangs, although he is in the material world. So Prabhupada here is so nicely describing the different levels of the different chapters and how it is a progression. Even though it's all absolute, it's all perfect, but still there's even more perfect within perfect. And there's more confidential within perfect. So 9th chapter is most confidential because it deals with unalloyed pure devotion. And therefore, there are no material pangs for someone who has understood this confidential knowledge. That person is liberated. So then, in these first 3 verses, Krishna begins by telling us what are the qualifications to hear Bhagavad Gita. Who is qualified to hear the Bhagavad Gita? So this is the first text, which I'm now going back to. Krishna begins by this. He says, Shri Bhagavan Vacha idam tu te guhyatamam pravakshyam anasuyave jnanam vijnanam sahitam yajyatva mokshase shubhat. Translation: The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, My dear Arjuna, because you are never envious of me, I shall impart to you this most confidential knowledge and realization, knowing which you shall be relieved from the miseries of material existence. Once again, my dear Arjuna, because you are never envious of me, I shall impart to you this most confidential knowledge and realization, knowing which you shall be relieved of the miseries of material existence. So Krishna again is confirming that this knowledge relieves one from the miseries of material existence. This is the result of this knowledge. And secondly, Krishna is pointing out that this knowledge is revealed to that person who is not envious. So Prabhupada explains that we come to this material world because we were envious of Krishna. It is that, thought, that mood that brings us to this material world. And in bhakti, we can engage all of the material imperfections in the Lord's service and purify them. For example, in a few classes before, we had discussed how the gopis, they engaged their lust in becoming attracted to Krishna, and that lust transformed into pure love. Hanumanji engaged his anger in the service of the Lord, and he became angry at Ravana, and that anger became transcendental by engaging it in the service of the Lord. However, the one quality that we cannot engage in the service of the Lord is envy. Envy is something, Prabhupada says, that just has to simply be given up. It's very interesting, that quality. It's not something that we can spiritualize because it's actually the original fault that brought us to this material world, our original mistake. And so we cannot be envious of Krishna or Krishna's devotees, because that envy leads to bondage. Then Krishna doesn't reveal this knowledge. When we are a devotee of Krishna, when we want to surrender to Krishna, and we are happy to see Krishna in his most wonderful form as Krishna, then Krishna reveals everything. Why is this? Because the philosophers who want to become God, that is, who want to say that they are Krishna, or Krishna is the soul within them, they are envious of Krishna, and therefore they cannot understand his message because they want to become him. So the first requirement to understand Gita is to be a bhakta. And only a bhakta can understand or explain the message of the Gita. This is why for so many generations, so many editions of the Gita miss the point of the Gita, because the authors are envious of the Lord. When we deny Krishna a body, a form, and his special position as the origin of everything, then we are being envious of him. And and that becomes a disqualification. Then in text 3, Krishna describes another qualification that is needed to understand this process of bhakti. So text 2 described how it was the most confidential knowledge. Now in text 3, he says, Ashradhana Purusha Dharmasyasya Parantapa Aprapya Mam Nivartante Mrityu Sansara Vartmani. Those who are not faithful in this devotional service cannot attain me, O conqueror of enemies. Therefore they return to the path of birth and death in this material world. So the first qualification is Shraddha. Some faith is needed to realize the Lord. Shraddha Shabde Vishwas ko hai. So without Shraddha, without faith, we cannot progress in spiritual life. Now, someone may say that, well, the reason I read the Gita is to get faith. How is it, or why is it that I'm supposed to have faith before I read the Gita? I mean, how does this make sense? So the reason it makes sense is because on this path, on any path in this world, one has to have faith. One cannot progress on any path without having some faith, without, making the leap and giving a person's time and energy and saying, well, I have to give it a try to see if it works or not. At least I have to make an effort. And unless one comes to that point, one cannot make progress. So Krishna is saying, yes, this is not blind faith. And Prabhupada makes this point many, many times. We're not into blind faith, but we must be faithful so that the process of devotional service can act. And those who are always skeptical, who are unwilling to make that leap of faith, their progress is generally slow because they continue studying the Gita, but they're unable to dedicate themselves to that knowledge. And therefore, Krishna is telling that we must be faithful in this devotional service. And he makes this point a few times in the Gita, actually, that how faith is so important. All of these verses point to the fact how armchair philosophy does not reveal the knowledge of the Gita. This is why bhakti goes along with jnana. Because unless we are dedicated to the knowledge, that knowledge is not revealed to us. There's millions of people who have read the Gita. So why does Krishna say that it's the most confidential when it's readily available? It's for this reason. He's giving the reasons why. Why this is confidential is because of these two things. Most people who read the Gita are not envious of the Lord, and they are many people. It's very rare to find someone who's not envious and who's faithful towards the Lord. And so therefore the knowledge is hidden and only the devotee can understand it. Now the next 6 verses are very enjoyable. They're very fun verses. They describe Krishna's relationship with the material world. Text 4 to 10. And this is the place in the Gita where Krishna is speaking this achintya bheda bheda, inconceivable simultaneous oneness and difference. He's speaking this philosophy of oneness and difference. So these are some of the verses. I'll just read the first 3. We don't need all of them, but this is text 4 to 10. Krishna says, by me in my unmanifested form, this entire universe is pervaded. All beings are in me, but I am not in them. And yet everything that is created does not rest in me. Behold my mystic opulence. Although I am the maintainer of all living entities, and although I am everywhere, I am not a part of this cosmic manifestation, for myself is the very source of creation. Understand that as the mighty wind blowing everywhere rests always in the sky, all created beings rest in me. So Krishna here in the first 3 verses is saying a contradiction almost. Just look at the first 2 here. He says, all beings are in me, but I am not in them. And then in text 5, he says, and yet everything that is created does not rest in me. So how can Krishna be saying this? This is a contradiction. Krishna here is now starting to describe this confidential knowledge, his eternal position, but it's contradictory. He is everywhere, but he's not part of this cosmic manifestation. Another contradiction. He says, I am the maintainer of all living entities. I'm everywhere, but I'm not part of this cosmic manifestation. For I, the self, and the very source of creation. So how can Krishna be both part of it and not be part of it? And this is the philosophy of Achintya Bheda Veda. This is called simultaneous oneness and difference. God is 100% one with the world, yet he is also different than the world. Throughout the Gita, Prabhupada at different times makes this point. In some verses, in one verse particularly, he says, everything is Krishna. You are Krishna, I am Krishna. This table is Krishna, this chair is Krishna, everything is Krishna. And you think, oh, Prabhupada here is now saying impersonalism. But then he says, no, but everything is not Krishna. Only Krishna is Krishna. So how can we understand this? Very deep point and a very important philosophical foundation. And this is the question that every religion in the world asks. What is the relationship between God, the souls, and the world? There's obviously 3 fundamental things in this world. There's God, there's all of us, the souls, and matter. And how do you understand the relationship between these? This is called in biblical traditions immanence and transcendence. God is immanent in the world, yet God is also transcendent. God is beyond the world. So how can God be both? This is very odd, but God needs to be both. Because if God is completely transcendent, then that means the world is separate from God. See why this problem is there, why it's such a big problem. Because if you say, oh, Krishna is not this world, then what does that mean? It means that there's Krishna and the world, so there's something that competes with Krishna. And that's not possible. God, by definition, means that God is the source of everything. And if you say that everything is Krishna, then that means that the faults of this world, the problems of this world, are also the problems of Krishna. So if you make God too immanent in this world, too present in this world, then that can be an imperfection that is ascribed to God. So therefore, religions and philosophers around the world have struggled with this problem, that how do you characterize the relationship between God and the world? Because whichever way you say it, it becomes a problem. And in Vaishnava philosophy, therefore, Jiva Goswami has given the perfect balance. He says God is fully one with this world, and God is also separate from this world. God has to be both. And we can understand this through the method of metaphors. How can something be one and different? Well, one metaphor that is given to describe the relationship between God and the world is an object and its reflection. You must have heard, right? In Prabhupada's purpose, he many times says that this material world is a perverted reflection of the spiritual world. So why does he use this metaphor of reflection? What is the relationship between a reflection and its object? In what ways is that reflection related with the object? I'd like to hear from some of you. In what ways is the world the reflection, and in what ways is God the tree? Yes.
Hare Krishna. Prabhuji, Krishna and his energy.
Krishna and his energies. Okay, so very nice. So right now we're dealing primarily with the metaphor of reflection. actually, yeah, let's just look at the metaphor itself, the tree and the reflection.
Hare
In what
Krishna.
way are they same and different?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Yes.
Dandat Pranam. So I think there cannot be a reflection without there being an object. And
Okay, very
it
good.
is
So let's
it
just
is the
do one.
object. Yeah, it is the object that is being reflected. So
Yes. You brought a very nice point. There cannot be the reflection without the object. There can be the object without the reflection, like you said. You can have a tree without the reflection, but you cannot have the reflection without the object. So this shows the dependence of the world on God. The world is inherently dependent upon God. There's no meaning to the world without God. The world is dependent and God is independent. So there's that imbalanced relationship there. Very good.
Hare Krishna. So the tree is the tangible object itself, but in the reflection, there's just an image casted. So, like an animal could walk by, and like a cat could walk by and see the reflection of the tree bearing fruits, and it might try to catch it from the water, but it can't actually reach it up from the tree. So it's kind of it reminds me of the spiritual versus material world, because the happiness that's in the spiritual world isn't actually tangible here, but we can see the reflection of it here, if that makes sense.
Very good. Yes. So just like on the tree, there are fruits, you're saying, and they're very tasty, they're sweet and sour. They're fruits, and it's very tangible. But in the reflection, it's there, but it's not tangible. It's in, yeah, it's very intangible, even though the tree is there. Same way the material world and Krishna. Very good.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
So the reflection looks like the tree, but it's not the tree. It's also different from the tree because it's inverted in some way. It can either be laterally inverted or inverted, like the picture you're showing.
Yes. Yes, very nice point. So the reflection is upside down. And this is actually true. Prabhupada says what is highest in the material world is the lowest in the spiritual world. And what is highest in the spiritual world becomes the lowest in the material world. Just like the love of the gopis and Krishna. That's the highest, most intimate rasa in the spiritual world. But in the material world, that becomes um, the lowest rasa, the rasa, that is forbidden, so to say, of unwedded love. Param Karuna Prabhu, I think you.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Dandavat Pranam.
Dandavat Pranam, Hare Krishna.
So I'm thinking the reflection could be altered if there is anything on the water, like a stone or something falls down, the reflection could be changed. It is very temporary, but the actual material is permanent.
Hare Krishna. Very nice point. The reflection is temporary. Based on the movements of the sun, the reflection comes and goes. It's still real because unless it's there, how could we see it? If it wasn't there, then we wouldn't be able to see it. It is there. So therefore, it is real. But it is a temporary reflection. Very nice point. Very excellent point, Prabhu. And secondly, the second point that you brought up is that you said something like it's affected by the medium which is reflected on. So it's like, if the water ripples, then the reflection also ripples. The tree doesn't ripple, but the reflection is changing based upon how the water is changing. In the same way, the material world, it's a perverted reflection. It's contorted based on the gunas. That same love becomes reflected as lust, and it takes many different forms. The same spiritual qualities of, like Krishna being a thief, reflect in this world where people also steal, but it becomes all muddy and dirty. So, the reflection is very dependent on the medium. Very nice.
Haribol, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna, Haribol.
Prabhuji, just kind of adding to the last comment that you made. One is relative and one is absolute, in the sense that the reflection, you already made that point. The reflection is actually dependent on other factors, meaning where the sun is, where the, you know, whether the lake or the water is stable or not. So it's relative in that sense, and the tree, on the other hand, is absolute in that sense. It's the same point, but I'm just.
No, you put it in a different way, which is very nice. So all of these comments were very, very nice. Narayana Prabhu, you have something?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. You can touch and feel the tree, but you cannot touch and feel the reflection.
Very nice. So some of the characteristics of the tree are present in the reflection, some aspects of it, but not all the aspects of the tree. So the form of the tree, so to say, the picture of the tree is there, but like you're saying, the sense of touch, the sense of taste, the sense of smell is not there. So it's also a limited representation of the tree. In the same way, we don't know, in the spiritual world, there might be 10 senses. So just like we see people, we smell people, we taste food, there's these senses that we use in this material world, and we know them as 5 senses. In the spiritual world, there could be 20 senses, which we cannot imagine in this material world what they might be. But there's other ways of experiencing reality in ways that are not present in the material world. Just like a person in the reflection world will only know certain senses and cannot even imagine that there's something like smell. But when they come out of the reflection world, they'll say, oh, there's something like smell as well. There's something like taste as well. So this actually metaphor of reflection is a very famous metaphor. Even Plato, in his philosophy, talks about God and the world, or the spiritual world and the material world, in terms of the object and the shadows. The famous analogy of the cave that he has. He compares this world to the shadow worlds. That is the reflections or the shadows of people as opposed to the actual persons. And what do all of these different characteristics, what do they illustrate? They illustrate this relationship of achintya bheda bheda, of oneness and difference. The reflection is one with the Lord. The reflection is one with the tree. Like Indira Mataji had mentioned, the Lord and his energies. It is the energy of the Lord. So in that way, it is one with the Lord. Yet, it's different in so many ways. It is lacking or modified in so many other different ways. In the same way, this material world has no existence without the Lord. The reflection is fundamentally existence on the object. There's no meaning of a reflection without its object. There's just no meaning of that. You cannot speak of a reflection without knowing its object. In the same way, the material world is intrinsically dependent on the Lord. It's nothing else but the Lord, but it's still different. And it's different in all these different ways that we discussed. And all these different ways apply to the material world. And this is why it's such an apt metaphor. This metaphor, it's used throughout the scriptures, in the Bhagavatam again and again, in the Vedas again and again, because it really does describe the relationship between the spiritual world and the material world. And it can encourage us that, right now we're living in this reflection world. And actually we belong to the spiritual world. Mataji? Yes.
Prabhuji, just wanted to share one more point, how reflection is dependent on the medium of water, but object is independent.
So the reflection is dependent on the medium of the water. Very nice. Yes. So there's things that this material world is dependent upon. And that's the energy of the Lord.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
Prabhuji, I had one other point, and I wonder we can talk about it. What about cause and effect? In the sense that, let's say I I burn the tree, the real tree. You will see the reflection of the fire on the water itself, but the fire did not originate in the water. It actually originated on the actual. So cause and effect, meaning you might see something happening on the reflection, but the cause of that is not from the reflection itself, it's coming from somewhere else.
Yes, very good point. So that relationship is also there, one of dependence, as we were saying, that the cause of the reflection is a tree and the effect is the reflection. So, like you're saying, if there's a fire in the tree, that will also affect the reflection. Only half the tree is there, then only half the reflection tree will also be there. So, the Lord is the cause of all causes, like Prabhupada says. The Lord is the cause of everything, and the material world is not. Pushpanjali Mataji?
Prabhuji, what about the time factor? Like in the material world, when we are living, it just feels like, everything is so big, our teeny problems and our life. But when you see it from the holistic picture, it is just like a teeny tiny dot in an endless line. So the time factor is also very pervertly reflected, where we think our little lives are so big and so important. Where in the spiritual world, if you see in the eternality thing, it's nothing, it's just insignificant.
Yes. Yeah, no, I mean, a very nice observation that in this world we are racing against time, right? We're actually racing against time. And therefore, there's so much anxiety. Like, we only have so much time to do things. We're always like, and if someone wastes our time, we feel disturbed because it's this world of time. We are limited and controlled by time in the physical world. But in the spiritual world, uh, we utilize time. In other words, time becomes a tool for spiritual exchange, and it becomes a servant of the spiritual exchange, and it becomes a useful tool. In the material world, time is something that controls us. See? So in spiritual world, there's also past time, right? Past time means time. There has to be past, present, and future. But that time is used for the pleasure and love. And in the material world, that time is a source of great anxiety. The same thing, that time becomes reflected in this world and it has the opposite effect.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Thank you. Nice point. Indu Mataji?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, I just have a question on this, Prabhu.
Yes.
So, is the material world made imperfectly so that we can actually realize there is something beyond? And is it for us to introspect and try to understand and get to that stage where we realize that this is incomplete and we need the spiritual world? Is that why it is made imperfect? Because the Lord has created so many different, like the different Vaikuntha planets and everything that's all perfect in itself in the spiritual world. But why is the material realm in this perverted reflection of the spiritual world?
Yes, no, that's a very nice point. So then what's the purpose of this world and this reflection? Why the reflection to begin with? Prabhupada says that this material world is actually a very small percentage of Krishna's creation. We say 25%, but in other places, Prabhupada says just a few percent, just a very small percent, not even 25%. And it's for the same reason that every government, when they create a city, they also create a prison. Because we have free will, we have freedom. So Krishna needs a place where those who misuse their free will, which is the very definition of free will, to have the choice to use it or misuse it, they have a place to go and learn. So the name of a prison is a correctional institution. It's meant to correct us, theoretically speaking. In the material world, it doesn't do that always. But in the perfect creation, the Lord's creation, that's what it does, and that it does it perfectly. So yes, this reflection world is made here so that we can give up our desire to lord it over material nature, so that we can give up our desire to become masters and controllers, and develop the desire to become the loving servant of Krishna, which is what actually makes us happy. Krishna knows that that is what will actually make us happy. And therefore, he puts some suffering in this world so that we can gradually revive our, realize that this is not meant for us. And actually, our natural position is to be part and parcel of Krishna. So Prabhupada gives the example, like the parents know that the small child will not be happy away from home, no matter how much they are determined, that they feel that they will be happy away from home. They know that that child will not be happy without the parents. But in the meantime, they may give him some play box to play in, to try to become mommy and daddy. But then after a few hours, they start missing their parents and they start looking, where are they, and they come back home. So the material world is like that. It's a place for us to grow and to exercise our free will and learn from our mistakes so that we go back to the spiritual world.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Yes.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare
Meenakshi Mohani Mataji.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, Danvat Pranam. So, Prabhuji, I was just thinking what you were saying, and a small question came to my mind. It might be like, I don't know, might be a stupid question. But once when we get liberated, or like for myself, I was thinking, what is the promise that we'll not be envy of Krishna again, or will not repeat our mistakes again? Like, will the memories of, of this material world be with us?
That's a nice question, a very good question. So Prabhupada says that this world has imperfections in it, but it's perfect because it's perfect for its purpose. So Krishna, those imperfections are there purposefully because it's perfect for its purpose. Now, because Krishna's creation will always be perfect and it's perfect for its purpose, that means it perfectly teaches us not to make this mistake again. So therefore, after going through this experience, we will never make this mistake again. And so then you ask the question, well, how will we not make it if we don't remember it? So Prabhupada says that we don't remember our experiences in this material world because they're very painful. We don't want to remember them when we're in the spiritual world. However, the impression of this experience stays with us. Just like at night, sometimes we see a bad dream. And when we wake up in the morning, we don't remember the details of the bad dream or the next day. However, the impression stays. Like, actually this morning I was dreaming. Someone got lost in my dream. And so when I woke up, I was like, oh, thank God that dream is over. Never again. Thank God it was a dream and it's all over. Never again, never again. So I didn't remember the details of the dream, but I was just relieved that it's over and very, very convinced that I didn't want to go back into that dream. In the same way, when we go back to the spiritual world, we know for a fact, never again. I'm never going to make this mistake again. It's just like, someone who's I don't know, been at sea for 2 years with no food and water and somehow survived and comes back to land. They'll never go back and make that mistake and get lost at sea. So it's like that. Yes. So theoretically speaking, Prabhupada says we can come back to the material world because we have free will. And the free will always stays there. We can still choose to leave Krishna again, theoretically speaking. But practically speaking, that will never happen. Because Krishna promises in the Gita that once you come back to my abode, Krishna says, you never come to this material world again. So his promise is there. That means it never happens.
Thank you, Prabhuji. That takes the tension away from my mind.
Yes. No, after working so hard to make that mistake again. Gopal Govinda Prabhu, I think you had your hand.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, very nice, and class is going very nicely. I had a very uh, simple question that in the initial you said that devotees are joyful, and I experienced this one thing that the people around, they comment that why you are so joyful, why you are so happy, what is the secret behind it. But reflection within mind says that I have my own miseries. I'm not that happy. Why these people are saying happy? So where is the reconciliation of that?
What was the second part that you said, Prabhu? That people say, why I am not happy.
No, people like the verse in the beginning, you said that devotees are the happy and joyful, right? So
Yes.
we see that reflection of that when you are in around with your friends and people, you attend a party or somewhere, they see that this person is happy and they ask that why you are so happy, what is your secret of happiness, right?
Yes.
And that's not just me or somebody else, this being noticed a lot with lot of at least senior devotees.
Yes.
And but the person himself is thinking that I have my own miseries, I'm not all that happy. What is the reason behind it?
Yeah. Yes, no, that is a nice point. You put it really well, that people say that, oh, you're so happy, because they notice that. And but the devotee himself, oh, they don't know I'm actually, like you actually don't feel so happy, right? At times, so that is, Prabhupada says, that is the fan that is stopping. So when we come to Krishna consciousness, we turn off the switch of this fan of material life that's running. But once we turn off the switch, the fan is still moving for some time until it completely stops. So that beautiful verse in the Bhagavatam is there, Tattenu kampam shushamikshimano munjana evatma kritam vipakam, where Lord Brahma tells Lord Krishna that for the person who goes on accepting the distresses in this world, humbly accepting those distresses, all the while offering obeisances to the Lord, understanding that this is the result of my past sinful activities that is coming to me. For that person, at the time, at the end of their life, liberation becomes their rightful claim. So we have found the path of happiness. Therefore, there's an inner joy that the devotee is experiencing. We sometimes forget it, but then when we stop chanting for 1 or 2 days, we realize, oh my God, how joyful I am when I'm chanting, right? So that is there. But it's very important to recognize that still the past impurities, present impurities, past reactions, present reactions are still there until we become fully purified. And those are sometimes very, very difficult. In fact, very challenging to overcome. And in fact, sometimes, like you're saying, the devotee suffers more than the materialist. There's a verse or a passage where it says that, there's 3 types of people. There's the self-realized soul, and the self-realized soul is perfectly happy. And there's the materialist, the gross materialist. That person is also happy because they're happy in their illusion. I mean, actually, they're not happy, but they watch TV every day and eat, it's French fries and hamburgers, and life is going on, and they're buying cars and enjoying life apparently, and they're also happy. But the person who is endeavoring for spiritual life, who's trying to improve their life, they are unhappy. They are the ones who are struggling and suffering. Why? Because they're coming from a low level of happiness to a high level of happiness, and that journey is, as Jesus Christ says, that journey is laden with thorns. And Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur also said this. He says that don't think that is on this path of bhakti you will have a path of flowers. He says your path will be very difficult. And he tells his disciples before he's leaving his body that don't succumb to these difficulties. Be more tolerant than a tree, more humble than a blade of grass. So like that, he gives his final instructions. Because in fact, the devotees have a very difficult journey. So then why are they more happy? They're happy because the fact is that they at least know the truth. They're not experiencing the truth, but they at least know the truth. And just knowing that you are coming to the end of the tunnel is something that's very wonderful, right? So yes, so this way the devotees, and then you see the self-realized devotees, the ones who are very advanced, they're very happy. And I've noticed this actually. I've observed this. They're, once they become very advanced, they actually just always joyful because nothing really bothers them. Everything is Krishna's hands, and they're just happy to serve Krishna and completely blissful in their service to Krishna. So,
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
Prabhuji, with this, is it not like, see, if I am trying to like lose weight and I see myself every day, so I cannot make the difference of, how much little I have lost. But people who see it, they can see that difference. I mean, per se, that sorrow that I might have been a non-devotee or that unhappiness, I still say it is unhappiness, but that was on the scale of like 100. Now it must be 90, but we still relate it as I'm still unhappy. Does it make sense?
Totally. You bring such a nice point. It's such a good point that, I mean, the devotee still, as when we're endeavoring to be a devotee, we still feel that we are unhappy. But compare that to the unhappiness and the anxiety and the terror of the material world, right? What the level of unhappiness is in this material world that, without Krishna, that people go through, their struggles are on a completely different level. I mean, imagine that I sometimes imagine that people's happiness is so much, that their unhappiness is so much that they enjoy watching horror movies. A person has to be so unhappy that they will enjoy watching a movie that's a horror movie and feel pleasure. To feel that to feel that pain is still less than the pain that I have, and so therefore that's pleasure. This is the material world, right? So yes, it's such a nice point that our unhappiness is nothing compared to what the material world is. So here are more metaphors. We talked about object and the reflection. This is a one that Prabhupada uses again and again, Bhagavatam uses to describe our relationship with Krishna. Then you must have heard the second one, the ocean and a drop of water from the ocean. What does this metaphor communicate? What is the philosophical principle that Prabhupada uses this metaphor to communicate?
Can I say, Prabhuji?
I say that again?
Like we are same in quality but different in quantity.
Yes, exactly. This is the standard metaphor for that. One in quality, but different in quantity. The soul is one in quality with God, like the drop is the same as the ocean in terms of salt and minerals, but different in quantity. And in that way, yes. Go ahead.
Prabhuji, I was thinking that the water in the ocean can cause a hurricane, but a drop of water cannot do that. So,
I mean, so that is due to the wind. That's not exactly due to the water. One could respond to that. So therefore, the drop is still one in quality with the water, but different in quantity. Now, some qualities are actually dependent on the quantity, right? So, like for example, being omniscient means you have all the knowledge in this world, and that's the quality of the Lord. But that's a quality that's inherently related with the quantity of knowledge that He has. In the same way, we also have knowledge, but the quantity is less, and therefore there's no omniscience. It's exactly like that with the soul and God, that we have the same nature, like we like to enjoy, like to serve, like to have relationships just like Krishna. But It's to a limited degree. Indira Mataji? Venkateshwar? Sorry, you're muted. You're muted. We cannot hear you. Yes.
The level of happiness in the material world and the spiritual world can be compared to an ocean and a hoof print and a water in the hoof print of the calf.
Yes, very nice point, Prabhu. That happiness is also here in the material world. We don't say that there's no happiness, and we cannot say that. I mean, you know, Elon Musk was feeling extremely happy when he became the richest person in the world for about a week. And so there's some happiness in this world, but there's only a very little bit, like the water in the calf's hoof print. As Venkatesh Prabhu just said, that is the happiness in this world. And the happiness of the spiritual world is like the ocean. So a drop in the ocean, yes. The third metaphor is of the flower and its fragrance. This is a very powerful metaphor to use. The fragrance is nothing else but the flower. And the flower has no meaning without the fragrance. At the same time, the flower is not the fragrance, and the fragrance is not the flower. In the same way, the living entities and this material world are nothing else but the Lord, but they are still different. And here, this is a very nice analogy, and it's used to illustrate the very core principle in our philosophy, which is that everything is the energy of the Lord. Because the fragrance is the energy of the flower, right? It's the power of the flower. In the same way, we and the material world, these are all energies of the Lord emanating from the flower, which is Krishna. So these are actually called emanationist philosophies, where not just in our philosophy, but other religions also, they say that how the world emanates from God. Shakti and Shaktiman. This is the basis of the Achintya Bheda Veda philosophy that Jiva Goswami says that how Krishna is controlling this world and creating this world, it is through his energies, and we cannot appreciate Krishna without his energies. When we remove all the energies from Krishna, then that is the impersonal aspect of God. Jiva Goswami says even the Lord's form is his energy, his Swarup Shakti. His knowledge is his Chitta Shakti, his knowledge potency. And understanding the Lord with his energies is understanding the complete Lord. Just like if you appreciate the flower without the fragrance, then that is a lesser understanding of the flower than someone who understands the flower with the fragrance, right? So the full, complete understanding of the Lord is the Lord with his energies. And the final metaphor that's used is the sun and the sunshine. The sunshine is one with the sun, yet it is completely different than the sun. When the sun is in our room, we say that the sun is in our room. But if the sun was actually in our room, we would have been long burnt. So the sunshine, again, is one in quality with the sun, but different in quantity. In the same way, everything in this world is the sun. It is Krishna, but it's all the energy of the Lord. So these are all metaphors to help us understand this relationship. These are, people love metaphors, so they're nice to use. And the important key here is that these metaphors are used to illustrate this idea, but Jiva Goswami is also saying that this is achintya, it is inconceivable, because these metaphors don't do justice. Like in the case of the sun and sunshine, the flower and the fragrance, you can still see or find ways in which they are different and how they might have a different source. But in the case of the Lord, there's no meaning of this world without the Lord. So it is one and also different. And therefore it is inconceivable. Because after these metaphors, one might say, why did Jiva Goswami say that it's inconceivable? Why did he say achintya? He said that it's achintya because of the fact that the relationship is actually closer and more contradictory than this relationship described here in these metaphors. Venkatesh Prabhu, you had...
Prabhuji, like if we compare the metaphor of energy and the energetic, so without the energy, the energetic is not supreme, no Prabhuji. Like, so if without, like Prabhupada also says there are a lot of times that Radharani is the energy of Lord. Without Radharani, Krishna is like, so how do we understand Krishna's supremacy here, Prabhuji? Like without Radharani?
Yes, that's a very nice point. And this is good point that you bring. The flower and the fragrance and the sun and sunshine are also metaphors used to describe the relationship between Radha and Krishna. And so the key point here is not so much about superiority. The key point here is that the very meaning of the sun is also sunshine, right? One cannot think of a sun without sunshine. If there's a sun without sunshine, then we're not speaking of the sun. We're speaking of the moon, or we're speaking of, a rock, because these things don't have sunshine. In the same way, of course, now we have plastic flowers, but even those have some fragrance. It's the fragrances of the plastic, but there's no meaning of a flower without fragrance. So in the same way, there's no meaning. There's no way to separate Radha from Krishna and Krishna from Radha. There are, like the Chaitanya Charitamrita says, they are one and the same, yet they're eternally different. However, at the same time, Krishna is the object of love. Krishna is, Srimati Radharani is the devotee of Krishna. So there's no meaning without one and two, but at the same time, they have different roles. Like you're saying, energetic and energy, and Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Krishna is, in that way, the source of Srimati Radharani. So the Chaitanya Charitamrita says that God is one, and this one God has eternally become as two, as Radha and Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Yes, thank you. And then it says that those two have come back and become one again as Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So yes, so they're then coming back together as Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Okay. So this is oneness and difference, Bheda, which is the relationship of immanence and transcendence. So actually, this is perfect segue, Prabhu, that you brought in. So in the Rasa Leela chapters, it's actually exactly described in this way, the relationship between Krishna and the gopis. Because the principal gopis are actually expansions of Srimati Radharani. They are not jivas. They're not, you could say, beings like us. So in our philosophy, Srimati Radharani and the internal associates of the Lord, they are actually a different category. They are not jivas. They are part of Krishna's Hladini Shakti. They are different than Krishna. They are souls, but they're extremely they're of a different category. They're divine, more closer to Krishna, you could say, in terms of their spiritual potency. So in the Rasa Leela, they makes the point in one verse that when Krishna dances with the gopis, he is actually dancing not with something foreign, but only with his own reflections. And this is actually also true of the jivas, that we are also reflections of the Lord. And so it can also be applied to them, but especially it is applied in this case. Thus, with broad, playful smiles and affectionate glances, the Lord of Rama delighted in loving the fair maidens of Raja, the gopis of Raja, just as a small child plays with his own reflection. And Shukadev Goswami makes this point. He says this verse to clarify that here Krishna is not doing anything wrong. he's actually playing with his own reflections, just like a child plays with his own reflection. So this is Radha and Krishna. They're one and the same, yet they're also different. And this is also the case with the living beings. We are just smaller reflections. Now the next section from verses 11 to 25. In this one, this section, Krishna covers all the different, and you could say, philosophies or ways of understanding God. Atheism, pantheism, impersonalism, polytheism, and monotheism. So what are these? Atheism means no God. Pantheism means nature's God. Impersonalism means no personality. God is not a person. Polytheism means there's many gods, all the demigods. And monotheism means there's one God, Krishna. So Krishna, one by one, tells us why these other philosophies of atheism, pantheism, impersonalism, and polytheism are not as good as monotheism. So here we start with text 11, very famous verse. It's a very important verse to defeat the impersonalist. This verse, Krishna is defeating impersonalist philosophy. He says, Avajananti ma mudha manusham tanumashritam param bhavam ajananto mama bhuta maheshwaram. Fools deride me when I descend in the human form. They do not know my transcendental nature as the Supreme Lord of all that be. So the biggest thing that the impersonalists say is that Krishna was Brahman before, and then he incarnated as a human being, and this Brahman became a human. So there's another verse, Ajopi Sangam, where Krishna further clarifies this point, that it's not that I had a form before and now I have a form, but I've always been transcendental. They don't know that my form is transcendental. And when you read these verses, you wonder, how is it that the impersonalists can use the Gita as a basis of their philosophy? How can they be reading the Gita and also be an impersonalist? It's unbelievable. But somehow, this is why this is the most confidential knowledge. They twist out a different meaning and they misunderstand these verses. But Krishna is crystal clear here. He says that my nature is transcendental. Only a person who thinks that I become a human being is a mudha. He's an ass. He's a fool, Krishna is saying. But still, people don't get this point. Text 14. Satatam kirtayanto mam yatantasya dhridavrata namasyantasya mam bhaktya nityayukta upasate. So then he says, well, then what is the best? He says, always chanting my glories, endeavoring with great determination, bowing down before me. These great souls perpetually worship me with devotion. Always chanting my glories, endeavoring with great determination, bowing down before me. So those are the great souls. They are the ones who are not mudhas, because they are worshipping Krishna with great devotion. A very famous verse of the Gita, this verse, Prabhupada says, Satatam, 24 hours a day, the devotee is engaged in chanting Hare Krishna. In these verses, text 15 to 19, the Lord is telling us that how through pantheism, through appreciating the Lord in nature, and by appreciating the universal form of the Lord, we can become Krishna conscious. So Krishna does not, you could say, Krishna does not reject this process in the way that he does impersonalism. Impersonalism, he said, no, this is wrong. Don't think that I'm a human being when I come in this world. I have a spiritual form. But in the case of meditation on the universal form, which is pantheism, nature is God, God is nature, Krishna says that you can become Krishna conscious through that path, although it's not the most effective path, which we'll see after these verses he clarifies again. So Krishna says, others who engage in sacrifice by the cultivation of knowledge worship the Supreme Lord as one without a second, as diverse in many, and in the universal form. But it is I who am the ritual, I am the sacrifice, the offering to the ancestors, the healing herb, the transcendental chant. I am the butter and the fire and the offering. I am the father of this universe, the mother, the support, and the grandsire. I am the object of knowledge, the purifier, and the syllable Om. I am also the Rig, the Sama, and the Yajurvedas. I am the goal, the sustainer, the master, the witness, the abode, the refuge, and the most dear friend. I am the creation and the annihilation, the basis of everything, the resting place, and the eternal seed. O Arjuna, I give heat, and I withhold and send forth the rain. I am immortality, I am also death personified. Both spirit and matter are in me. So Krishna is saying that he's, he's the healing herb, he's the butter, he's the fire. All of these ways we can appreciate the Lord. And we saw this in chapter 7. Krishna mentions this in chapter 9. And then again, he will very extensively describe this in chapter 10. So obviously, Krishna wants us to see him in all these things. And it's a quality of the devotee that the devotee sees the Lord in all things, in all situations, and at all times. This is the vision of the Lord. In whatever situation the devotee is, the Lord doesn't see that person or that problem, but rather the devotee sees the Lord. That the Lord has come to me through this problem. The Lord has come to me through this situation. The Lord has come to me through this experience. Something the Lord is teaching me through this or showing me through this. So this is very important. And in all aspects of this universe, in all the creation, the devotee is seeing the Lord. So this is the pantheistic, appreciating the Lord through his universe. Next verse, well, not exactly next verse, but then Krishna again clarifies. But no, ananyas chintayanto mam ye jana paryupasate tesham nityabhiyuktanam yogakshemam vahamyaham. But those who always worship me with exclusive devotion, meditating on my transcendental form, to them I carry what they lack and I preserve what they have. This is possibly one of the most famous verses of the Gita. This is a verse that is very dear to the devotees. Krishna is saying that if we worship him with exclusive devotion, if we depend upon him and we meditate on his transcendental form, we appreciate him as a person, then if we are relating with him as a person, then Krishna says, to that devotee, I carry what they lack, I fulfill what they lack, and I preserve what they have. I maintain what they have. And if we, keep this verse close to our heart, we will never have trouble sleeping at night. Because Krishna here is giving the promise that Krishna is the ultimate insurance policy for his devotee. He is protecting and preserving and maintaining his own devotees. And it is a fact that the devotee of the Lord will never be lacking in anything, because the Lord is always taking care of him. And we can be assured by this verse that if we are a devotee of the Lord, the devotee never goes hungry. The devotee is never, Krishna always arranges something for that devotee. And if the devotee does go hungry one day, then the devotee understands that Krishna must not be happy with me. Therefore, this is happening. I think it was a class by Hridayananda Maharaj. I think he said that because we are all part and parcel of Krishna, if we are feeling unhappy, then it must be, or we are in some how did he put it? Something like that. You get the basic idea. We're in some, distressful situation. Then the devotee knows, not distressful situation. The devotee can be in a distressful situation and be happy. If we are feeling unhappy, then the devotee knows that Krishna must be feeling unhappy with us. Because because since he is feeling unhappy, we are feeling unhappy. So therefore, Krishna is guiding the devotee at every step. And the devotee will feel great happiness at all times, unless Krishna, for some reason, is doing what he's doing. Krishna, protects a devotee, but at times we see that a devotee may get a health problem. Great devotees in our movement, they got cancer or something like this. They got COVID. So Krishna is then doing that to bring them back to him, or to bring them in some particular, Krishna has some service in plan for them. But a devotee otherwise cannot be lacking in anything. In terms of good health, in terms of wealth, in terms of food, Krishna always takes care. Now, in this next verse, Krishna now starts talking about polytheism. Well, what about those who worship him and also worship other beings also, other gods and goddesses? He says, Ye pyanya devata bhaktya yajante shraddhayanvita tepi mameva kaunteya yajantya vedipurvakam. So this verse is you could say, the sutra argument against demigod worship. Krishna makes it clear in black and white that we should not worship demigods, and why. Those who are devotees of other gods and worship them with faith actually worship only me, O son of Kunti, but they do so in a wrong way. Krishna could not be more clear. And the Sanskrit is also very clear. Avidhi purvakam. Vidhi means knowledge. Avidhi means not knowledge, wrong knowledge. So they are doing, but with wrong knowledge, in the wrong way. Avidhi purvakam. Why is that? Next verse, or 2 verses later, Krishna says, those who worship the demigods will take birth amongst the demigods. Those who worship the ancestors go to the ancestors. Those who worship ghosts and spirits will take birth among such beings. And those who worship me will live with me. So Krishna is saying, whatever your object of worship is, that is where you will go. So, some people, they're very attached to their forefathers and they worship them, like their grandfather or their father or their, and Krishna is saying that you'll go and meet them again. If you're very attached, you'll meet them again. If you worship ghosts and spirits, you'll be born among such beings. If you worship the demigods, you'll go to the heavens. But all these places, he says, right, Brahma, Bhuvanar, Loka, from all the way Brahma's planet down to the earth, they're all places of birth and death. So if we don't want to die again, then we should worship Krishna, because then we will go back to Krishna. Those who worship me will live with me. So chapter 9, why is it the most confidential knowledge? Very, you could say very dense. Krishna goes point by point by point by point, defeating all the different philosophies. Rupa Vilas Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhu Dandavad. In this verse, Krishna says, those who worship the ancestors go to ancestors. And my understanding is that whoever left the body, they are all ancestors. So what is that means? What is that ancestors means in this verse?
Yes. So just like people do, right? What is it called? Pitar. When they worship the four. Yeah. What do they say?
Pitralok, like they go to.
Yeah, they do.
Pitradan, Prabhu.
Yeah, Pitradan. Yeah, Pitradan. And they do, it is sometimes very excessively, extensively. Every year they'll go to Gaya and they'll, do that. The Pindan also. And they'll worship so they can go to Pitralok. They'll worship their forefathers. So you're absolutely correct. Anyone, your father, grandfather, and anyone who has passed away, if they worship that person and they go and they pray to be transferred to that planet, Krishna here is saying they go to that planet. Now, I guess there's a planet with ancestors, because Krishna is saying they go to the planet of ancestors. It's like it's a planet of uncles and aunties. And once you're if you're very much attached to your social circle, you can go to the planet of uncles and aunties.
So that means like there is a temporary planet for them until they get liberated.
No, then they'll come back to the material world. They're in the material world. They'll come back to Earth. They'll come back to this planet. Just like someone goes to the demigods, they become Indra or they become Varuna due to their pious activities and praying to the demigods, getting elevated there. Then once their punya karma, their good karma runs out, they come back to Earth. And then again, they try to become a devotee and go back home, back to Godhead. Or in rare circumstances, from the heavenly planets themselves, they can go back to Godhead. So in the same way, the planets of the ancestors, they're like these special planets or some other planets where they go and they enjoy, and then they'll come back, and then they'll again, in their next life, start from where they left off.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Prabhuji, I had a question but we don't know, right? The ancestors, what body they might have taken, whether they might have gone to the Pitraloka. That's not guaranteed because it depends on the activity and what they thought at the time of death. So I'm sorry if
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I was wondering about that myself. How does Krishna manage this? It's a pretty big project to manage. But Krishna is the best project manager. Somehow he manages it so that he fulfills the desires of the living entities, because it's our desires that carry us to the next world. I'll give you one example, Mataji, a very nice example that I heard directly from very senior devotees that many of you know. Well, maybe I can mention their name. I don't know the details, so don't quote me on this, but it's Madhumati Mataji and Shesha Prabhu. So I'm pretty sure they told me this. I think Madhumati Mataji, she mentioned that when she was going to get married to Shesha Prabhu, then they went to the astrologer. And the astrologer told them that you both have been married. You have been together since the last 7 lifetimes as husband and wife. So maybe they're switching roles in the last life, she was the husband, he was the wife, like this. But since the last 7 lifetimes, you've been together. And so when the astrologer told them this, then whatever doubts, or they didn't have any doubts, but whatever question there was in their marriage, should they get married or not, it's a big decision. They were all gone. They got married. It was meant to be. So this is not exactly forefather worship, but this is the same idea that if we are attached to our loved ones, Krishna will arrange it so we can come back and be together again. And therefore, Prabhupada actually makes the point. He says that married life, therefore, it's such a challenge either way. Prabhupada says, if it doesn't work, if the marriage is not successful, then there's so much trouble. And if it does work, and the husband and wife are very attached to each other, then also it leads to attachment, and in the next life we'll have to come back, and that attachment will bring us back into this material world. So you're successful or you're not successful, either way, it causes bondage. It can cause bondage, and therefore we should become Krishna conscious. If both husband and wife are Krishna conscious, then at the end of their life, they won't be thinking of each other, but they'll be thinking of Krishna. And so they'll go back home, back to Godhead, you see. And then in the spiritual world, see, relationships amongst devotees, relationships in devotee families are spiritual because they are devotees. and we also have to treat them like devotees. So they're devotees, so therefore they are spiritual, those relationships. And any spiritual activity done is eternal. So we develop spiritual relationships, spiritual service, and so our service may continue in the spiritual world together. And that's why material family life is not so, you could say, permanent, but spiritual devotee family life is oftentimes quite significant. And those relationships, they're centered around Krishna. So actually, for advanced devotees, it really doesn't matter to us so much. We want the association of devotees, and it doesn't matter to us if we're all there together in the spiritual world. But the point is that there's some spiritual connection there. That's why Krishna puts these certain devotees together in a certain family. And I was actually listening to a very interesting class. This was by Vichitra Krishna Prabhu in Delhi. And he was saying how in the spiritual, in a spiritual family, because all the family members are devotees, it's also a very unique relationship, because once we are amongst devotees and we're living amongst devotees, then our anarthas and our, you could say, sinful activities or whatever karma we have to go through, it'll only come through another devotee, because we're surrounded by devotees. So when there's problems in that spiritual relationship, then we have to be careful, because it's still a devotee who's our family member. And if we offend them, then we'll get karma for it. At the same time, the only place that will, the pathway through which Krishna will teach us is through that devotee. So it may be that that devotee is a very nice devotee, but through that devotee, Krishna is teaching us something, and therefore we become cross with that person, or there's some problem. So in that spiritual relationship, we have to we have to see it from both ways. What he was saying, that we have to see it from both ways, that always remembering that there's another aspect to this relationship, and how this person is also a devotee and also a member of my family. Okay, so I'm just going to finish this section, because this is the last few verses, and then we'll have discussion. Yes. So in this final section, from verses 26 to 34, Krishna then glorifies worshiping Krishna directly. He really then doesn't beat around the bush. He never does, but he just goes and gives us the conclusion of chapter 9. Patram pushpam phalam toyam yo me bhaktya prayachati tadaham bhaktyopahritam ashnami prayatatmanaha. So this is one of the most famous verses of Gita also. You probably heard this. If one offers me with love and devotion a leaf, a flower, a fruit, or water, I will accept it. So Prabhupada in the purport mentions that this is the key element here, is love and devotion. And if we truly love Krishna, we won't just offer him a leaf. We'll offer him a full bouquet. But Krishna's point here is, even if you offer this to me, if it's with love, then I will be fully satisfied. Just like the Pandavas, right? When they didn't have any food and Krishna came, they offered him a grain of rice, or they offered him a tulsi leaf, and he was fully satisfied. So Srila Prabhupada always wanted the best for Krishna. He established, the most pompous, the most glorious worship of Krishna. And he also showed that the key element in that was love and devotion. And he also showed that the process of archana is actually offering Krishna flowers, fruits, water, incense, simple items. And here we see Srila Prabhupada doing arti to Krishna Balaram in Vrindavan. Next verse, which is Karma Yoga. the theme verse of Karma Yoga, he says, Yat karoshi yadashnashi yajjuhosi dadasi yat tapasyasi kaunteya tat kurushva madarpanam. Whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you offer or give away, whatever austerities you perform, do that, O son of Kunti, as an offering to me. In this way, you will be freed from bondage to work and its auspicious and inauspicious results. With your mind fixed on me, in this principle of renunciation, you will be liberated and come to me. So, Mam Anusmara, with your mind fixed on me, give whatever you have to Krishna. This is the message here. Whatever we do, do that as an offering to Krishna. So, so the previous verse was focusing on bhakti, that the key element is devotion. And this is showing how Karma Yoga is Bhakti Yoga in its highest form. That, well, whatever we are doing, Krishna is saying, even if you don't have time to come and offer me a leaf, and you're just busy in what you're doing, then whatever work you are doing, offer that to me. And then you'll become free from the bondage of work, and ultimately you'll come to me. So remember, Karma Yoga is doing what we are doing, but offering the result to Krishna. Bhakti Yoga means doing what Krishna wants us to do, and also offering it to Krishna. Just doing what Krishna wants us to do. So this message, Yat Karoshi, is not actually the highest, you could say, yeah, it is not the highest message of Krishna. It can be. It can be, because generally whatever we are doing, Krishna wants us to continue do and offer it to Krishna. But this is actually a very key point here, that it's not necessarily that whatever we do, if we offer to Krishna, it's not bhakti. Because Arjuna was a warrior. That was what he does, and Krishna wanted him to do that. And that was bhakti for him. So whatever we are doing, Krishna will be very happy, generally speaking, that we do that, because that is what we do, and offer to Krishna. But bhakti means that we do whatever Krishna wants us to do. So it's not necessarily on the platform of bhakti. The highest principle is doing simply what Krishna wants us to do. What to speak of giving the result, but the very work itself is what Krishna wants us to do. And now in these three verses, Krishna gives a very deep message of the Gita. This is something that is a very deep discussion. Prabhupada quotes this and many, many times, where he's establishing the greatness of such a devotee. So now he's described what unalloyed devotion is in so many verses. And to make that clear, he's now describing the position of such a devotee. Text 29, I envy no one, nor am I partial to anyone. I am equal to all. But whoever renders service unto me in devotion is a friend, is in me. I am also a friend to him. So Krishna here, first of all, establishes a very close relationship of friendship. That this person is a friend to me. This person is very dear to me. And he's so dear that text 30, even if one commits the most abominable action, if he is engaged in devotional service, he is to be considered saintly because he is properly situated in his determination. Even if one commits the most abominable action, if he is engaged in devotional service, he is to be considered saintly because he is properly situated in his determination. And what does this mean? Practically speaking, what does this mean? This means that if a devotee has faults, but if that devotee is engaged in the service of the Lord, and it continues to be engaged in the service of the Lord, we should accept that devotee to be saintly. Why? Because we know that then that devotee, it's only a matter of time, will become purified of his mistakes. Because on the account of being in service, and therefore they are they actually don't possess those faults, because soon those faults will go away. So practically, I've also seen that this is actually, like Prabhupada, when he was preaching to devotees, this was his main concern, that devotees stay engaged in service. If that person gives up his service, then it's a matter of great concern, because now not only do they have, you could say, these apparent faults, these mistakes, but now the means of purifying those faults is also has been stopped. And so that is a great loss. But if that person somehow stays engaged in bhakti, then that person's faults will get eventually rectified. The example is that if Mataji before gave the example of weight, right? So if someone is exercising, it doesn't matter how much weight they have now. If we compare weight to a fault, right? It doesn't matter how many faults they have now. If they're exercising, they're as good as thin. They're as good as slim, because they will become slim. But if they give up their exercise, then it's actually a great loss. In the same way, the process of devotional service is so powerful. It's like fire. It burns away all of our sins, and it will forcibly drag us to Krishna. It will take us to Krishna, because that's what bhakti does. Akama sarva kama va moksha kama udardi tivrena bhakti yogena yajeta paramapam. That we have desires, we don't have desires. If we perform bhakti, the process will make us fully purified. The process of bhakti, that will lead us to moksha. That is how powerful bhakti is. And so where we are on the path doesn't matter so much. It matters if we are on this path. Next verse, text 31. He quickly becomes righteous and attains lasting peace. O son of Kunti, declared boldly that my devotee never perishes. Again, I didn't quote the verse here, but it's one of the most famous verses of the Gita. Kshipram bhavati dharmatma shantim shantim kaunteya pratijanihi name bhakta pranashyati. Name bhakta pranashyati. O son of Kunti, you declared boldly that my devotee never perishes. So even if he makes a mistake, he will still be considered saintly. He'll get purified. And if he's my devotee, for that reason, he'll get purified, will never perish. So such is the special quality of a devotee. Now in this purport, Prabhupada makes a special point that he says that we should not take advantage of these verses. We should not take advantage. We should not think that if I perform a bad activity, it's okay, Krishna will forgive me and everything is fine and I'm still righteous, I'm still saintly. Also, we should not allow others to take advantage of this. The reaction will still come. If a devotee performs an abominable action, the reaction will still come. A devotee will still have to suffer for it. And therefore, we should be very careful. But Krishna's point here, we should still consider that devotee a devotee, and that devotee should still be considered saintly because they haven't left the process of bhakti and they're engaged in bhakti. To give you an example, in the Bhagavatam, when Indra, when he performs a great offense and he kills, I believe it was the Brahman Vishvarupa, then he kills this Brahmana simply out of envy. And Indra is also a great devotee. And he made a mistake also, Vishvarupa. He was favoring the demons. He should not have. But still, Indra gave, his punishment was too heavy, and he gave it through envy. And so therefore, Indra had to undergo a very severe reaction. Very, very severe reaction. For 1,000 years, he had to atone for that sin. But still, he was a devotee. After that, he came back to Krishna consciousness. He became a devotee. and he's still Indra. He's a demigod and a servant of the Lord. So the reaction does not escape us. Of course, Krishna gives us causeless mercy, and he may forgive anyone he likes. But it's not a free pass. The reaction will still come, but that devotee is still saintly. So this is important point here. The second important point is that why is Krishna telling Arjuna, you declared boldly that my devotee never perishes? Krishna is telling this to Arjuna because Krishna's word is at times not so dependable. Because during the Mahabharata, Krishna broke his promise a few times. And he broke his promise, why? When he was in the battle of Kurukshetra, then Bhishma Dev had promised that tomorrow, he had promised to Duryodhana that tomorrow either the Pandavas will die or Krishna will have to break his promise. Krishna will have to fight in the battle. Tomorrow I will fight so valiantly, I promise you, Duryodhana, you are questioning my trustworthiness, my my vow to support the kingdom. So I give you my vow that tomorrow all the 5 Pandavas will be dead unless Krishna breaks his vow and he fights on the battlefield. So he made this promise, and Krishna also had his promise. Krishna promised that in this battle I will not raise any weapons. So on the next day of the battle, when they were fighting, then Bhishma Dev was shooting arrows at Arjuna in such a valiant way that Arjuna was actually losing his composure. And he started shooting arrows into Arjuna's body. Blood was flowing from his body. And at that point, Krishna, being the Supreme Personality of Godhead, through his mystic power, could have allowed Arjuna to overcome Bhishma Dev, as he did so many times. Arjuna overcame so many powerful warriors, even though he was he was not so powerful. So Krishna could have mystically made Arjuna more powerful, and in this way broken Bhishma's promise. However, because Bhishma Dev is a Mahajan and a great devotee of the Lord, Krishna chose to break his promise and not the promise of Bhishma Dev. So here, there was sort of a competition of promises. Bhishma said either Krishna will break his promise or the devotees, the 5 Pandavas, will perish. One of those two things will happen. Now, Krishna has promised that my devotee will never perish, so he could not let the Pandavas die. That was not an option. The second option was he could allow Bhishma Dev, he could make Bhishma Dev break his promise, but he was his devotee. And so by breaking Bhishma Dev's promise, he would have made Bhishma Dev perish. Because for a Kshatriya like him, dishonor is worse than death. His promise would have gone empty. So to protect both of his devotees, Bhishma Dev and the Pandavas, Krishna broke his own promise. And so therefore, if Arjuna declares, Krishna is telling Arjuna, you declare it. If Arjuna declares that my devotee never perishes, then Krishna will never let that promise go in vain. And therefore Krishna tells, declare it boldly, Arjuna, that my devotee will never perish. You declare it. Because then there's no question. I will never break that promise because it's your promise as my devotee. So we'll come back to these points, 2 very important points here about this, the devotee always being saintly and the devotee never perishing. And then the very controversial issue always comes up. What about women? Are they also devotees of the Lord? So here Krishna says, Mam hi partha vipashritya yepi sun papa yonaya striya vaishyas tatha shudras tepi yanti param gatim. O son of Pritha, those who take shelter in me, although they be of lower birth, women, Vaishyas, merchants and Shudras, can attain the supreme destination. So here Krishna is saying that everyone can attain the supreme destination, be considered of lower birth or higher birth or middle birth, whatever their birth might be. On the spiritual level, everyone is equal. And as we've discussed in previous classes, um, because on the spiritual level, everyone is a soul and everyone is equal. Like we were just saying, we change bodies. One life, someone is a man, another life, that same man becomes a woman, and the woman becomes a man. That is the vision that Krishna is working from. Krishna is saying that everyone is equal because everyone is a soul. But in the material context, some people say that Shudras, Vaishyas, and women are lower. The society at that time, the society, you could say, norms were such. But Krishna is saying that for me, no one is lower. If they are my devotee, if they take shelter of me, they will attain the same supreme destination. So a key point to recognize here is that Krishna is actually arguing against the point, especially for the women present on this call. Krishna is arguing against the idea that women are of lower birth, because he's saying that they will also attain the supreme destination. So though they be considered like this, though the people, the society may say like this, but for me, those who take shelter of me, they are all equal. So this is also a fact, not just in terms of women, but also Shudras. In Vedic culture, Shudras are not considered to be the highest caste. But Narad Muni was born in a Shudra family, and we see that he becomes the greatest saint of bhakti. He advises and teaches great brahmanas like Vyasadeva. So being part of a quote-unquote lower birth is actually a qualification of bhakti, because the process of bhakti is one of humility, one of service, one of dedication to the spiritual master. And so the qualities of the Shudras are such, they are hard workers, they're following the instructions of their employers. So they already have those humble qualities, and those humble qualities can become assets in our spiritual life. Like Narad Muni, because he was so gentle and simple and simple-hearted, all the sages gave their full blessings to him, and he became the greatest sage. So it's very important not to misunderstand or misrepresent this verse to mean that Krishna is saying that women are lower, that women are less. He's actually saying the opposite. He's actually saying that everyone is equal because everyone can attain the supreme destination. Krishna is also in other places, in Hari Bhakti Vilas, Sanatan Goswami makes a very clear point. He says that whatever distinctions you could say in terms of low and high you find in the Vedic scriptures are there in the material context. But the specific verse states that in the spiritual context, when a woman becomes a devotee of the Lord, then her position is as exalted as the man's position. Although they may have different roles, but in terms of lower and higher, there's no such thing, because they're both spiritual beings. They're both spirit souls. So Krishna here is saying that this is the path for everyone, and we find this so many times in the scriptures also, like the wives of the Brahmanas and the Brahmanas, that how the wives of the Brahmanas were more fortunate. They were more spiritually advanced than the Brahmanas were. When the boys and Krishna go to ask for food, then they give them food, but the Brahmanas do not. In the scriptures, you'll find examples of women sages who are chanting the Samaveda. There's actually mention of Rishikas, or female sages who chant the Samaveda, who are chanting the Vedic hymns. In the Ramayana, there's the example of Sita Devi. She was doing the the Surya samskara, I forget, in which one chants the the Vedic mantras. So on the spiritual level, on the material level, there are different roles and distinctions based upon our psychophysical nature, but on the spiritual level, the process of bhakti is all encompassing. At least this is my realization. This is the way the great souls have explained this to us. And the final verse, Krishna really concludes it. Bhagavad Gita 9:34, Manmana bhava madbhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru mame vaishyasi yuktva atmanam matparayanam. This verse is quoted almost identically twice in the Gita, so it's one of the most essential messages of the Gita. Engage your mind always in thinking of me. Become my devotee. Offer obeisances to me and worship me. Being completely absorbed in me, surely you will come to me. So here Krishna gives the path. This is the way to God. This is how we reach the Supreme Lord. And by worshiping Krishna, we can reach the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Always thinking of him, becoming his devotee, offering obeisances to him, and worshiping him. And if we do this, we will surely come to Krishna. Okay, so thank you for your kind attention. We finished this in 2 hours. Now, if there's any questions or comments, we can talk about this.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
May I ask some questions?
Yes.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. So I had 2 questions. One was about the pantheism theory. And how is it different from impersonalism? You said pantheism is seeing Krishna in nature and his universal form. And impersonalism, I mean, to my understanding, is also, looking at not the person, but looking at him as his universal form.
Yes, good question. So there's Brahmavadis and there's Mayavadis. Brahmavadis are okay, they're transcendentalists. Mayavadis they have the wrong philosophy. So what is the difference? The Brahmavadi, like the pantheist, like you're saying, says that God has an impersonal form in nature, an all-pervasive form. But the Brahmavadi does not deny the fact that God has a personal form. He doesn't say that God is not personal. The Brahmavadi is just attracted to worshiping God in God's grandeur as nature, as a universal form, as Brahman. So Krishna is telling that the conception that I am not a person, and that when I become a person, I become just an ordinary human being. When this light or effulgence becomes a person, it becomes an ordinary human being. That is a foolish idea. That is mudha. That is rascal. That is impersonalism, Mayavad. But someone who's a Brahmavadi or a pantheist is just saying that God is present in nature. Nature is so beautiful. God is so beautiful. And there's nothing wrong with that. So that's the difference.
Thank you, Prabhuji. And the second quick question I had is, about when devotees commit mistakes, if they are still, abominable activities, if they are still in devotional service, that's still considered okay. So in ISKCON itself, we have had several cases of gurus falling down. So are they still to be, and like extreme things which have happened, so are they still to be considered saintly? How do you reconcile that?
Well, see, this is the test, and that's why the verses, I'm glad you brought this point up, because the verse is said very carefully. It says, even if one commits the most abominable action, if he is engaged in devotional service, he is to be considered saintly because he is properly situated in his determination. So the test is this: if they make a mistake or do something very bad, if as a result of that they leave Krishna consciousness and they're not engaging in devotional service, then at least for the time being, they cannot be considered saintly. because they've left the process of bhakti. But if they continue in their devotional service, then it's understood they made a mistake, but now they're still in the process of purification. They're still keeping themselves in the fire of purification. So some gurus in our movement, they made a mistake, but then they immediately rectified it. They apologized for it, and they continued for it. Such a devotee, it's a great offense to criticize them for a past offense that they may have made. Like let's say accidentally slipping on one of the principles. Even then, as I mentioned, the reaction will still come. People there may be some restrictions imposed on them. Certain, obviously just the bad reputation is such a difficult thing to handle. So the reaction still comes. If there's something actually legally involved, they may have to even go to jail or something. So that is still there, but the devotee is still saintly. Now, if they leave Krishna consciousness, they will still be considered saintly because they were a devotee. But it's still a different situation. One still has to, wait until they come back to spiritual life, because they're not leading the life of devotion. So, the reaction is always there. But like Prabhupada, in one place he says that Brahmananda, his disciple, who was at one point Brahmananda Maharaj, he said he has done so much devotional service. He said that even if you see him with a cigarette in his mouth, he says you should offer your respects to him. Prabhupada's exact quote. Prabhupada says this. Now Brahmananda Maharaj is no longer on the planet. But after his serving Srila Prabhupada, he had some challenges in his spiritual life. And Prabhupada said, even if you see him with a cigarette, you should still offer your respects to him because he has done so much service. So the Lord never forgets the service of a devotee, and therefore we don't have the right to forget the service of a devotee. That also doesn't mean that if they have a cigarette in their mouth that we should associate with them. We still have to choose our association, but we still have to respect them. We still offer our respect to them, but not associate with them.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Yes.
Sorry, Mataji wants to just a little to understand. So it's like, if I fail in an engineering one subject or a couple of subjects, they will ask me to repeat it, or, they will, they ask me to take a 1 year break, and then still I am enrolled in the program. I'm not out of the program. Is it what, in Krishna consciousness, if people make mistake, or even if I make mistake, I'm still on the path. I'm still enrolled in the whole Krishna consciousness. But going out of the program, leaving the program, and then, then it is, then we have to start with real effort again.
Yes, very nice example, Mataji. Thank you for explaining that. Very nice point. The devotee, the spiritual master becomes very unhappy when the disciple leaves bhakti altogether. That is the, then I've seen my own experience, my own Guru Maharaj, he becomes very disturbed. How did you leave your service? If the devotee makes mistakes, it's okay because they're enrolled in the program, but they have to be corrected. But still, it's okay. It's still part of the path forward. Yes. Thank you for that. Here, Rohan Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much for the nice class, Prabhuji.
Thank you.
Prabhu, Prabhu, I had a question from the second chapter, actually. The famous verse, Vasamsi Jiranani Yatha Vihaya. The purport of that verse, it says that one who lays down his life on the sacrificial altar or in the proper battlefield is at once cleansed of bodily reactions and promoted to a higher status of life. So there was no cause for Arjuna's lamentation. So I was just trying to understand that why were the Kauravas supposed to attain the heavens when they are killed? Because they were on the wrong side of dharma. Was it just because they were engaged fully in their prescribed duties? Because even if they were killed, the propensity to sin was still there, right? So,
yes. So anyone who saw Krishna on the battlefield went back home, back to Godhead. But those who fought performing their prescribed duty and did not see Krishna, they went to the heavenly planets. Because they died performing their duty. As a soldier, even if they were on the wrong side, see, it was not their decision to do the battle or not. That was Duryodhana's decision. Imagine the case of a draft. So they, or not even draft, the point is that they have to fight because that is their prescribed duty. I mean, they're Kshatriyas, they have to defend the kingdom. But those who, it was very rare, but one or two soldiers switched sides and went to Krishna's side because they understood a higher principle and they went back home, back to Godhead. So it just depends on their level of realization. If they were just doing their dharma as a fighter and engaging in the battle and sacrificing their life to perform their dharma, then they deserve to go to the heavenly planets. If they were evil and sinful, like Duryodhana, then they would not go. But they were not the ones making the decision, you see. Duryodhana, he, of course, because he saw the Lord, he was sort of you could say, also pious in one way, and therefore he must have had a somewhat good destination. But generally speaking, the soldiers in the battlefield are not the ones implicated, but the commanders and the leaders are, because the soldiers don't have much choice. They have to fight, they have to do their duty. And if they carry that out, they go to the heavenly planets.
Very nice. Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much. Kalavati Mataji?
Hare Krishna Prabhu. I wanted to ask about text 30. So what about somebody who commits Vaishnava Aparadh? Are they also to be considered saintly, or is this verse not talking about Vaishnava Aparadh because that's on a completely different level? I just wanted to get your understanding on that.
Yes. That's a nice question. My understanding is that this also includes Vaishnava Aparadh, because we see like Indra, he performed Vaishnava Aparadh twice. First to his spiritual master Brahaspati, and then to Vishwarupa. And then he had to atone for it. He went through very serious reaction. And then he continued his bhakti, and then he became rightfully situated again. Now, the reaction of Vaishnava Aparadh is very great. And so therefore, it's to be taken very seriously. The reaction will be very serious. But then also, there's a limit to it. If we perform Vaishnava Aparadh intentionally and repeatedly, then we will lose our saintly status. But this is more, Prabhupada explains in the purport, he specifies specifically, he says, this is accidental fall down. You make a mistake. So Indra, out of an immediate, you could say, response, he did not think clearly, and he performed an offense to a devotee because he was driven by his modes. He's a demigod, so he's very, very passionate, and because he had this passion, that passion was released towards a devotee, and that caused a Vaishnava Aparadh. But if we do it repeatedly and conscientiously, then we will lose our saintly qualities. Vaishnava Aparadh, that's why you're asking the question. Is it's you make a good point. It's very serious, so therefore it would apply more in accidental situations.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's a good point. Ambika Mataji.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Danvat Pranam. So I just wanted a clarification from chapter 8, verse 1, where, Arjuna is asking who is Brahman. And, the explanation in the Parpad is that, the absolute, supreme absolute truth, Bhagwan is Brahman. At the same time, the living entities are the super individual, super soul. They are also Brahman. So I think based on today's explanation, I guess since the living entity, they are also in the same quality as the super soul. I think is that a reason the living entity as well as the supreme lord both are called Brahman? I just wanted to understand that.
Yes, that's exactly the reason why. Because today's discussion actually explains why both the living entity and the Lord are all called Brahman. Because it's all the sun, right? The sun and the sunshine. They're all one, yet they're also different. So, Mayavad philosophy is that Brahman has no variety, it's all one. But Krishna conscious philosophy is that Brahman is one, but in that oneness, there is variety. In that energy, there are transformations, there's variety. So Brahman is of many types. It's all Brahman, but still there's, uh, small Brahman, big Brahman, meaning that the living entities are small part and parcel portions of that Brahman.
Okay, okay, Prabhuji, thank you. And I just wanted to, say thank you and, say, how fortunate we are that we are learning, Bhagavad Gita from devotees and in association with devotees, because, people can take it in a wrong way because, especially this Mayavadis or, the people who are not on the path of devotional service who are reading all these words, and they can actually by going through all these verses, they can think that Krishna is sort of being bossy here. Krishna is showing his supremacy, and they can actually become envious that why Krishna still become envious. But if we think about it in a different way, by listening from devotees, we understand that how significant insignificant we are and what is the position of Krishna. So it's like completely opposite, like from where you get your knowledge and what is the source. So really, really feeling very fortunate that we are getting this association and getting an opportunity to learn from you, um, with all the devotees. Thank you.
Thank you, Mataji. Yes, that's the key, right? That because we're learning this through Srila Prabhupada's explanation and through the devotees' enlightenment. I mean, it's so easy to misunderstand the message of the Gita. Because all the editions of the Gita, it's amazing. They give the opposite meaning. Krishna is saying here, I'm a person. My human form is transcendental. Yet people miss that. So yes, thank you. Thank you. Hare Krishna. Next, Swati Mataji, or you already spoke? What? Okay.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. I did have one more question, if I may ask. It's about chapter 8.
Okay. Maybe I'll ask a few more from
Sure, Prabhuji.
and then I'll come back to you. Yes.
Thank you.
Brandy Mataji.
Hare Krishna. I have two questions if it's okay, but I'll just ask my first one and see if we have time. I was wondering about attachments to spiritual relationships. I asked a question here at the Krishna House in a class recently if you can be too attached to your spiritual master, and the conversation about families. If as long as Krishna is the center of a relationship, can you be too attached to a devotee or whoever it may be?
That's a very nice question. And the thing is that the attachment of a devotee for another devotee is always through Krishna. Through Krishna, meaning not in an impersonal way, not it's like, okay, my attachment to you, somehow mystically goes through someone else. No, but the thing is that the devotee does not, the reason why the devotional relationships are significant is because of the presence of Krishna in them. And so therefore it's not possible that the devotee is attached to anything else more than Krishna. You see, the spiritual master is significant is so special because Krishna is present in the spiritual master. And that's why the spiritual master is so special. Same thing with the devotee family. Our devotee family is very important. Our devotees, friends are important because Krishna is present. And so, therefore, the first object of attachment that the devotee has is for Krishna. And that's why sometimes you see disciples, they're just like, on one hand, the guru is more important than God. You see examples of that in scriptures where they say guru is more important than God, in the sense that there's an obligation. The disciple feels the guru has taken me to Krishna. And so therefore, my first duty is to serve my guru, which is 100% true. But Prabhupada at the same time says that the guru is not God. The guru is not separate from Krishna. The guru has no identity that is independent of Krishna. So the only way to really appreciate the guru is to appreciate him as a servant. So it should also not be on a emotional or sentimental level, the attachment to the guru, because sometimes disciples can go overboard and not realize that my guru is one of the servants of Krishna, not the only servant of Krishna, and I have to, appreciate and show affection to all of Krishna's servants, while at the same time realizing that my particular service is to serve my spiritual master, and I have a special relationship with my spiritual master, and my spiritual master is guiding me. But Prabhupada says that the Mayavadis, they only see the big feet of their guru. They don't see anything else. And he criticizes the Mayavadis for this. They don't even care for God. All they do is they see the big feet of their guru. That's it. So that is not the spiritual mood. And that is very important, because then we can also see devotees equally. We can see, no, there's so many wonderful devotees of Krishna because they're all servants of the Lord.
Thank you. Okay, do I have time to ask another quick question?
Yes.
Okay. What if we commit an offense unknowingly? Like, what if our intentions are pure, especially being a neophyte, especially me? What if we commit an offense completely unknowingly with pure intentions?
So yes, that is an offense of a different quality, because there's some feedback, so I'll just keep this. Because on one hand, those offenses will have less reactions. But on the other hand, it's important to realize that there's really no offenses that can be done unknowingly. Why? Because, like they say, there's just a common statement. I'm just doing it just because it's a good analogy. They say that evil is not always when we perform an activity, but evil is also when we fail to perform an activity, right? Or and that's extreme situation like that. So same thing like that, that if there is an offense, it was due to maybe a conscious bad activity, but it could also be due to a lack of consciousness. And when that lack of consciousness is there, then we can perform an offense. So to give you an example, we may go out and insult a devotee and just tell the devotee, you're so stupid and bad. So obviously that's a intentional offense. But an unintentional offense could be that we're somewhere and a devotee comes and we ignore the devotee. And we didn't even realize the devotee is there. Well, we are not to blame because we intentionally hurt someone, so the offense is a lot less. But a devotee is very conscious, right? He's Krishna conscious. He's very personal. So the devotee will be conscious that, okay, what is my duty here? And if we're not, then it can still be an offense, and then we'll learn through that mistake. So, just like, so many examples I can give in serving the spiritual master, right? Someone may make an offense by making an offense by, not following or offending the spiritual master. But at the same time, like Indra's offense, his spiritual master came and he forgot to offer his respects to the Guru. So that was also a mistake. But then through that mistake, Indra learned to be more conscious. So the lack of consciousness can also be an offense, and then we learn from that mistake. But that offense is much smaller in nature.
I don't know if I can ask. Is there a specific way to right that wrong then? Like, can you go up to that devotee specifically? Do you have a duty to do that? Should you explain your
If that devotee is offended, if we find out that the devotee is offended, then we can go to that devotee and say, I made this mistake unknowingly, and I'm sorry about this. Of course, so many you might be chanting in the temple and so many people come in and out, and there's no need for us to offer our Hare Krishna to them, because they're not expecting it and they're not offended by it, because that's just normal human life. But if there is an offense, then we have to do that. There's a story of Rupa Goswami. I think it's Rupa Goswami. Yes, Rupa Goswami. Where one time he was engaged in worshiping the Lord, and in deep meditation, he was meditating on Krishna in his internal lila, and Krishna did something really funny in that pastime. So he was seeing that pastime in the spiritual world, and Krishna did something very funny. So Rupa Goswami started laughing. He just started laughing, laughing like anything. And as he was doing that, there was a devotee that was walking by who was hunchback. And that hunchback devotee was, a little conscious of the fact that he was hunchback. And he didn't like the fact when people laughed at him because he was hunchback. And so when Rupa Goswami was laughing, that hunchback devotee thought that Rupa Goswami is laughing on him. So Rupa Goswami didn't know this, he's laughing. But all of a sudden his meditation broke. And his meditation broke and he couldn't understand, why did my meditation break? And he felt that it's broke because I offended a devotee. Message there is that, offenses stop us from seeing the Lord. So then he did a little research and he found out that this devotee was walking by and he felt offended because he thought Rupa Goswami was laughing at him. So then he went to the devotee and he clarified the situation. And he said, I was actually laughing in meditation, and I apologize for this. So that is the perfect example, that sometimes we may have a devotee who's overly sensitive and there's nothing wrong that we did. But still the devotee, if he knows that devotee is offended, he'll try to rectify the situation.
Thank you. So it's the devotee's responsibility to try to figure that out too, though, right? Like the person who's offended.
Within reason. Yeah, like sometimes for our service, we may be obliged to offend devotees, some devotees, but we have to do it for our service to other devotees, right? So sometimes, let's say there's a conflict between two devotees and both devotees are 100% convinced that they are correct. Then one side is from the guru's point of view or from the counselor's point of view, one side is correct. And so the decision is made in favor of the side that's correct. So the other side may be offended, but and they may still be offended. They may not agree no matter what is being said, but the devotee performs that service for Krishna because that's the way to go. So within reason, we have to do it. But if we know we made a mistake, then we try to rectify it. Okay. Hare Krishna. Rupal Prabhu? Pushpanjali Mataji?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. So the question is about keeping word. So if we say yes to a job offer and telling them, yeah, I intend to, work and continue, and then if we get another offer which we feel is better for our Krishna consciousness, is that breaking word, or should we not do it? But please.
Well, Rupa Goswami says that we should accept everything that is favorable for Krishna consciousness and reject everything that is unfavorable for Krishna consciousness. That is the ultimate rule, and that is the ultimate regulation. So we do whatever is good for Krishna consciousness and reject elsewhere. So we have to do that. Now we have to also understand that the devotee is truthful because that is good for our Krishna consciousness also. So we have to, in specific situations, we have to see what will Krishna be most pleased with. What do the devotees and Krishna want me to do? So in the case of Yudhishthira Maharaj, Krishna wanted him to speak a lie, and therefore he spoke a lie. But in the case of other devotees, Krishna became especially pleased with them because they kept their word. Like the story of the cow and the calf in Vrindavan. I won't tell that story right now, but he was especially pleased with the cow because she kept her word to the lion. So Krishna becomes very pleased with that. So we have to see what will please Krishna more. That is a key.
Thank you, Prabhuji, but it's very hard to know what Krishna wants us to do. I think I'll just ponder and pray. Thank you so much.
Yes. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Gopal Govinda Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Yeah, that was, I think, my previous question, but I was just trying to refer the examples from Chaitanya Charitamrita that Chota Haridas, he did some mistakes, and he then he took his life. But when the news came to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, then he embraced him, and like he mentioned that he's liberated right away. Something like that happened, right? So even though he was abominable activity was done, but it was because he was devotee, he was still continued his services. So that was one example. Another example was in Prabhupada Lilamrit. There was sannyasi, he was engaged in grasta, and then when he heard his activities from Prabhupada, then he gave up his life. And when Prabhupada heard it, then he was like overwhelmed with his actions, and he prayed to Krishna that accept him in the services.
Yes. Actually, Chota Haridas, that example in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, it also serves as a counter example. Because initially, when he made the mistake, then the devotees came back to Lord Chaitanya and they said, please forgive him. He made a mistake. This is a small mistake. Please forgive him. Please accept him back. And Prabhupada says, and Lord Chaitanya said, I don't ever want to see his face. Right? He doesn't just accept him as saintly and say, well, because Chota Haridas was clearly engaged in devotional service. He made a mistake, but he wanted to serve the Lord and continue serving the Lord. And Lord Chaitanya says, I don't want to see his face. In spite of the fact that he was completely fixed in his Krishna consciousness after making that mistake. And the message that Lord Chaitanya was teaching there is that Lord Chaitanya tolerates everything, but he does not tolerate hypocrisy. Where the devotee, he was in the renounced order of life, but he was still looking at a woman. And he was not willing to tolerate that. To set the highest standard, he did that. Yet, then after that, as you are saying correctly, Lord Chaitanya embraces him and accepts him back, but with much difficulty. And he comes in Lord Chaitanya's dream and he sings for the Lord. There's two devotees, and I think I'm mixing the two of them. But in both cases, there was a period of atonement that happened before Lord Chaitanya let them back into his movement. So Lord Chaitanya could be as hard as a thunderbolt and as soft as a flower. But both of those purposes was to help the devotee. If he lets everything go, then there's no standard. And then hypocrisy becomes a standard. And that also Lord Chaitanya didn't want. So as I mentioned to you, that the devotee is still saintly. All the devotees there thought that Chota Haridas is saintly, and they always kept him to be saintly. But the difference was that but the point still is that he still had to go through the reaction. Thank you. Yes. Narayan Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
This is regarding 9.4. Lord Krishna says, all living beings are in me, but I am not in them. But as I read in the Srimad Bhagavatam or earlier in Bhagavad Gita, without super soul or Godhead, life will not be there in the living beings. How is that? The little.
Yes. So that's an excellent point, and that's where this point of achintya bheda bheda comes in. That the Lord is in everything, yet Krishna is saying, "I'm not in them." So He is present in all beings, yet He is also transcendent. So Krishna is in us, but it's not that if Krishna is in us, He's not outside. Krishna is also there in Golok Vrindavan playing his flute, and He's also in us. He's saying, I'm in them, but I'm also not in them. I'm also outside. So yeah, both things, both contradictions are there. But Krishna can be simultaneously present in both places. He's present in our heart, and He's also present in the spiritual world.
He's not there, He's there. So something like very, it's very difficult to understand that
No,
thing.
He's there, but He's also elsewhere. So it's not that He's there and He's not there. He's there, but He's also elsewhere. And in that way, He's not there because He's also elsewhere. And see, Paramatma in the heart is an incarnation of the Lord in which there's the aspects of Sat and Chit, eternity and knowledge present there. So it's like a photo of the Lord in the heart. You can see the Lord, you can meditate upon Him, but you cannot exactly have a relationship with Him. So the incarnations of the Lord are also different. So Prabhupada explains this actually in one place. He says the Paramatma feature is a feature of the Lord in which the Lord is present for the meditation of the devotee. But as far as Swayam Bhagavan, Krishna Satchit Ananda, that is only present as Krishna Swayam Bhagavan. So the Lord is fully present as Krishna Shama Sundar in Vrindavan. And His various expansions, the Lord is present, but He's not manifesting all of His qualities. And so in that way also one could say that Krishna is present but also not present. He's not, like, for example, in our heart, He's not doing Rasa Leela there with the gopis. In the mind of the devotee, the Lord may be in touch, they may be seeing that, but He's present as Paramatma. That's His form present there. And so yeah, he's there, but He's also not there. He's there and He's also elsewhere also.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Hare Krishna. Rupal Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Dandot Pranam. Very nice lecture, Prabhuji. I have a question about the offense. So when there is a misunderstanding between two devotees and the devotee is senior to you in a devotion and you try several attempts to talk to them to clear the misunderstanding, but if they are not willing to talk to you, then what can be done?
So then we leave this, we let the situation stay for some time. So we try our best. We make our utmost attempt to reach out to that devotee, to mend with the devotee. But if it's not working, then we can just leave the situation, leave this, let it be for some time. Because I personally experienced that after some time, the devotee will remember and recall that this devotee was being very nice to me and I turned them away. And as they say, time heals, right? So then time will allow them to then realize that, and then they'll come back and say, Prabhu, I was sorry and I apologize for whatever, or let's talk, I'm now ready to talk. So sometimes we have to just leave it to Krishna, and that's part of the process of bhakti, surrendering to Krishna, that we just leave the situation to Krishna.
Okay. Thank you, Prabhuji.
Yeah, and if the devotee comes, then we again are ready to speak. So in other words, there's no stoppage from our side, but we can just let it stay for some time.
Okay. So like you attempt once, twice, you give them time, you attempt again, ask them, would you want to talk? And even they still, come back and refuse, then maybe I should leave it to, you should leave it to Krishna and let Krishna. Then you don't, in that time, I'm not taking the Vaishnava Prad, right? Because I did my job.
Yes.
So,
Yes, we did
yeah.
our part. Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much for clarification, Prabhu.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Swati Mataji.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji. I'm really enjoying these sessions, so thank you very much. Prabhuji, I had a question from chapter 8. In 8.22, Krishna is talking, but he speaks of the Supreme Personality in the third person. Instead of saying, I am present, etc., he's saying he is present. And I was a bit confused, why would he do that? Because generally when we are speaking and I'm talking about myself, I would say I, not she.
Yes.
So why is that happening? And I also have a question on 8.27 and 8.28.
Okay. So let's go to that verse here, chapter 8.
8.22.
22. Okay. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is greater than all, attainable by unalloyed devotion. Although he is present in his abode, he is all pervading, and everything is situated in him. Yes. Yeah, I mean, without, I mean, I can only, this is a way of speaking. This is just a, Krishna in the previous verse is saying what the Vedantists are saying. So he's saying in the Vedantists, that person that the Vedantists describe as the unmanifest and infallible, he's saying that person is present in his abode and is all pervading. So, so like Arjuna tells Krishna, Asita, Devala, Vyas, they all say that you are the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In the same way, even Krishna himself did give us faith that he is Krishna, he's the Supreme Person in there. Because any imposter can say that they're Krishna. To say that, to make that point that what he's saying is correct, he's saying even the Vedantists are saying this point. And my understanding is because he's speaking of the Vedantists, he's speaking now in the third person. The Vedantists are saying that he is present in his abode. And then he does say, actually, in the previous verse, he says, that is my supreme abode. So he says, so he's speaking a bit in third person that, look, this is what Vedanta philosophy says, and this is who I am.
I thought, is this what is causing people to think about impersonalism? When you say that, oh, some people interpret it as impersonalism. So because he talks like this, in between in the third person, I don't know if that's kind of the impetus towards that, but your explanation does make sense. So thank you for that. And Prabhuji, in 8.27 and 8.28, Krishna uses the word yogi. Instead, he could have conclusively said bhakta, but then that yoga is interpreted as bhakti yoga. So why doesn't he just come out and say bhakta instead of saying yogi, to make it clear?
Which one? You said?
27 and 28. Yeah.
Yes, we'll see. I mean, in that one, even the gopis are described as yogis. So he's saying this is who the highest yogi is, because people want to become yogis. So he says, yogi param sthanam upaita chadyam, that Prabhupada says that this bhakta, he is the highest yogi by performing devotional service. Now, but the point that you're asking is a good point, right? That, well, why is Krishna not even more clear? Krishna could have been more clear. It's possible. But Krishna is purposely less clear because to those who are envious, Krishna gives them a pathway to justify their envy. And this knowledge has to be understood through a pure devotee. So if Krishna explained it perfectly clearly, then what would be the role of the devotee? Krishna wants the devotee to explain it. Therefore, he speaks a little unclearly. Because that's the process of surrender. He's given us this process that if we really want to know what he's saying, we have to hear it from a devotee. So it's in fact said that sometimes Krishna purposely speaks in, you could say, in
ambiguous
complex
terms.
ways. Yeah, ambiguous terms.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji. That's very helpful. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Kapil.
Thank you so much for such an insightful message. So one quick question on text 934. So do you mind sharing some examples of devotees, past or present, who personify these 4 or 5 attributes that are mentioned in 9.34? Because it is a simple formula, great formula, but it's very hard to keep our mind always absorbed in Krishna, thinking about him. So any examples that you can share or personal anecdotes?
Well, there are so many wonderful examples in our scriptures, like Raghunath Das Goswami was offering 1,000 obeisances to the devotees of Krishna every single day. Imagine, that's like actually very difficult. It's after like 50 or 60, your knees and everything really start hurting. But he would offer 1,000 obeisances just to remind himself that he's the servant. Imagine, look at their humility. So Krishna here is saying, offering obeisances to me. Continuously thinking of Krishna. The example is Prahlad Maharaj, always absorbed in thought of Krishna. He's saying, become my devotee. That's, I think, applies to all of us and all the devotees. They all have become Krishna's devotee. And worshipping Krishna. The example is Ambarish Maharaj. He worshipped Krishna by using all of his senses in the service of Krishna. So he's a nice example for all of us, because we are also, you could say, worldly people. We have jobs and professions and all these things. So Ambarish Maharaj engaged all of his senses in the service of the Lord. And that is how to worship the Lord. And to be completely absorbed in the Lord. Because if we engage our senses in the Lord, then we can always be absorbed. If we try to meditate after 1 hour, our absorption will go away. But whatever we're doing, whatever we like to do, if we do it as a service to Krishna, we will be continuously absorbed in the service of Krishna. So yes.
Thanks a lot, Prabhuji. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your wonderful association. Thank you, everyone, for being so patient. It took us a bit longer today to cover this chapter. It was a very important chapter, so that's why. And I'll send out the homework for this, and I look forward to your association next week. We will have a wonderful discussion on chapter 10. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna,
Hare
Prabhu.
Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare
Thank you.
Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Dandavat pranam.
Dandavat pranam. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Thank you.